Hi, I just want to do a quick video to look at your grade book again. Now that you have some grades in your platform, you should have taken. You had some homework, you've had quizzes, and you've had a test. So um, when I look at this home page here, the it shows you some information about where we're at. I did extend the quizzes out to this Monday, but and then we're into chapter 4. But if you click on your grade book, I just want to make sure you look at this again. Make sure you don't have any confusion about how the grading works. So if I was done with the quarter here with these grades, I'd have a 72.54%. I'd get a C. And but it shows how much homework is coming, how many quizzes are coming, how many tests are coming. And then just to talk quickly about this is again, it's like you have 100 points possible for the quarter. If you got 100% on all your homework, you'd get 10 points. If you got 100% on all your quizzes, you'd get 30 points. And 100% on all your tests, you get 60 points. And then you'd have 100% basically, or a top grade. So what it's showing as you're going through this again is here's where you're at. Now, average scores, like for homework, um, I can improve that score and go back and actually redo assignments to make sure it gets better. But the quizzes and tests, you're not going to have an opportunity to redo or undo a grade once that's in, though you get 3 or 4 attempts at the quizzes with me only taking the highest score. So you sure want to take advantage of that. But as we go on with tests, now I've had one test, I got an 87.5% on it. Well, that's the average for the quarter. If I got, a 70% on the next test, it's going to be 87.5 plus 70 divided by 2. So it doesn't go down to 70, but it'll, decrease that. And as we go on, when we have more and more tests basically affecting that average, it's harder to move that average percent that is times this amount of points. So, um, I want to emphasize the importance of the parts of that. Some of you have not done all your quizzes to prepare for the test, and I usually see lower grades on that test, which is can affect your grade quite a bit. So, but just a quick thing about that, and then I want to go into chapter 4, and I'm just going to generally go over chapter 4 to really emphasize what's important to get out of this chapter. And hopefully some of you are seeing, even with this review we did on 93 material with chapters 1, 2, and 3, that it's about understanding the concepts. And the only thing that the big parts that went into chapters 1, 2, especially chapters 1 and 2, is we have order of operations, we have ways to override order of operations with the commutative, associative, and distributive properties, which we're going to use strategically to deal with a lot of different situations that can happen with expressions and equations in algebra. And algebra is a language, so learn the words. I mean, the commutative property, they're going to refer to that. Terms and are parts of an addition. Factors are parts of multiplication. If you run into a word in the book that you're not sure what that means, stop, go to the glossary, or go to the index. Look that word up. You can stay right in this book and probably get all the information you need. So use this resource. This is the best resource, and then all the other resources involved with my math lab are very powerful if you use them. So now this chapter 4, it's kind of like when you started in kindergarten. We learned how to count. Then they taught us how to add and then subtract and multiply and divide. And then later in school they talked about this thing called exponents, and which is for powers. It goes through that in section 1, all these deals that we covered in chapter 2 too. But what they're going to do is look at not new rules about powers, is that we're going to learn some shortcuts and basically bring in some exponents that we probably haven't dealt with. You may never have seen, like something to the 0 power. And they're going to give us some rules and how that works, and there's very good lessons in here on setting up, hopefully, ways that you can remember the product rule and the quotient rule and the power of a power rule and so on, because we're going to need to use these things. Just like with multiplication of numbers, you don't go back to adding them. If I have 7 times 13, you're not going to go 7 plus 7 plus 7 plus 7. You learn shortcuts to deal with basically a distributive property when you take 7 times 10 plus 7 times 3. That's a distributive property used on 7 times 13. And you can probably do it in your head if you do that. That's exactly what I'm talking about, being able to use these rules, these properties, to problem solve. And just like you getting in a car, you can drive someplace. If you want to minimize the amount of errors, you want to get there the shortest way you can and hopefully not get in an accident. So they're going to go through these exponent rules. There's going to be some stuff about negative exponents, and which is coming up in section 2, and scientific notation, which is has rules. So it's a new way to write numbers. Basically, in science, we have a lot of very large numbers and very small numbers. So once we have negative exponents, we can write very small numbers in scientific notation. The rules are you have to have this n times 10 to some exponent. This n needs to be between 1 and 10, and it could be equal to 1. That's what this means. 1 is less than or equal to n is less than a 10. So whenever they ask for something in scientific notation, make sure that it's in scientific notation by definition. So they set up, basically, here's some shortcut rules. You could write them down. You can look at this. This is the end of the chapter summary for chapter 4. But the best way to use these or learn how to remember these things is apply them. You could go through a lot of the assignments in section 1 without actually applying some of these rules, but that's the intent, is that you practice this. So when you see 8 to the 9th power, like number 4 here on the simplify, 8 to the 9th power over 8 to the 2 power, with this rule that it's really 8 to the 9 minus 2, or 8 to the 7th, and they'll expect you to write it just as 8 to the 7th power rather than taking that exponent into a very large number. Then we get into things we've seen, expressions. We're going to get a little more complex, and there isn't really anything more complicated about other than some terminology here. We got degree of a term as part of an addition, and there's real specific rules on that, and degrees and coefficients, leading terms, leading coefficient, degree of polynomial. And they're really defining parts of a polynomial so we can get basically the next part of this, so we can communicate some strategic ways to deal with this. So, and that's what they're setting up. And they actually name terms like mono means one, monomial is a one term, bi means two, binomial, trinomial. And that's the only special ones that we deal with. We're going to do a lot with these trinomials. Then they talk about like terms, similar terms, but basically this is using the distributive property to be able to do this, which is something called factoring with the distributive property. And you're factoring with a strategy in mind. How can I take this polynomial, this multi-term addition, and write it in a simpler way? And they're showing us that we can take like terms. When they show this, actually I can rewrite this as 3 minus 1 all the quantity times y to the 4th power. So I get 2 times y to the fourth power. And in that section, they go through details on how that works. And then when we evaluate polynomials, we're going to put values in for the variable and follow order of operations. Negatives and exponents and those kinds of things, very important to make sure that you follow order of operations correctly and do your signs correctly. And something I do that they don't show here, when I rewrite an expression like this on my scratch paper, I would write this as t cubed minus, or excuse me, t cubed plus negative 2t squared plus negative 5t plus 1, which is changing that subtraction to an addition. And every time they ask for terms, what they're expecting you to do, this term right here for where it says minus 2t squared, that the term is negative 2t squared. So I write it as an addition, and most of the time I make less errors with signs because it's easy to forget when you're subtracting a negative what happens with that. So they basically, how do we work with these polynomials? And then it's just like number systems. We're going through addition and subtraction. How do we add and subtract these things? How do we multiply them? And then we have these special products. And in this section, you're probably going to know enough to get through this section without knowing these special rules. But in Chapter 5, these special rules are very crucial to know and understand excuse me, to be able to factor, which is harder. In Chapter 5, they're going to go through these special things called differences squares. You need to recognize when you have something squared minus something squared that I can factor that or break it into a multiplication that looks like this. If you use FOIL or just distributive property, you're still going to get this, but they want you to use these patterns, just kind of like those exponent rules. And then square of a binomial, there's a pattern that you should practice, and so you get used to recognizing that. And then when you have different, you have more than one variable, they work with that. And then they go into division of polynomials, which is division by a single term or a monomial like this 3t. It's pretty simple. You just take the addition of fractions, which is when I have this addition over this common one denominator, right, I can break that into separate fractions, just knowing how to add fractions, which goes back to Chapter 1, Section 3. And if fraction's still confusing to you, please work on that. It's worth the time to go back, make sure you understand the process of working with it, know the rules inside and out, and not some memorized technique with, I had one student talking about cross multiplication stuff and memorized techniques that work sometimes but not always. So we're going to talk about things that always work. So you use the rules here, you can do that. But if I have a binomial divided into a trinomial in this case, I can use long division, and they go through some real details of how that works. You need to look at that. And just kind of like long division with just numbers, you have to memorize or practice that technique to use it. And there's going to be some times when you need to do that. And that's Chapter 4. And I know that's quick, and don't take this as now I don't have to watch the other videos or anything else. We have a lot more time in Chapter 4. To work just on Chapter 4 stuff. It's not review of prior class stuff, which was pretty fast. I mean, a lot of material pretty quickly, but hopefully, it's a pretty good indicator right now if you think you're going to be able to make it through this course, because you need to know almost everything that we just went through in Chapters 1 through 3. So just a quick video on that. Please take time to make sure you understand your grading, and use this video as a general idea of what do I want to get out of this, is use these techniques in your assignments. There's a reason to it that doesn't seem like it's even easier sometimes, but when they're talking about squaring binomials and stuff, make sure you use that pattern when you're filling in the product or the result of that multiplication. Because next chapter, you're going to have the product, this trinomial, and if you know the pattern of squared binomials, you can look at it, test it by the rules, and really increase your ability to factor or break things into multiplications, because in chapter 6 we're going to deal a lot with fractions, and the only thing we can do with fractions to simplify fractions is to have factors or multiplications, just like what we did when we're simplifying fractions or multiplying fractions. You want a prime factor, and then you can make fractions equal to 1 using those prime factors if they exist. So, and then you're ended up with 1 times 1 or whatever times 2/3. And same thing, same process, same rules. We're just applying it to something where you really need to use those rules exactly to be able to get through this middle section of algebra. So anyhow, good luck on this chapter, and it was nice meeting some of you that were able to come to the test in Wenatchee, and for you that are up in Omak and other areas around the state. Hopefully I'll get to meet you someday.